imagine, so those were physical, non-threatening things mostly. I hope that you weren't threatened by the parts of your body, but imagine that those were your different identities and having to show up in all of those identities in so many different ways all of the time. Okay, so the first part of this presentation is a little bleak. The state of black women, so my research question, which this is context for my research question. I'm asking black teenage girls in the United States how they feel about themselves. Most of this presentation is not actually about that, it's about the context into which that question is being asked. So questions like these. Psychology Today in May 2011 had an article, so this was the online version. Psychology Today is sort of the popular mainstream version of what's going on in psychology. The question asked, no, the article was titled rather, why are black women less physically attractive than other women? The article was pulled, I have mixed feelings about it being pulled offline. One, because now there's all these articles about it, but I can't find it to quote it. I read it when it came out, but I can't find it to quote it. So it's now secondary information, and it feels like 1984, where the thought crimes were happening, and someone's job was to always keep the literature current, or whatever the president or whatever the person in charge in 1984 was saying, to make it seem like that was what had always been said. So, and the article probably had never been run in the first place, except it's so true, as far as what, how valued or devalued. Devalued is a term that I'm kind of working through as a black woman in the United States. So questions like these, and statistics like these. This is a graphic from online dating where the question here is asking by broad categories of ethnicity, so black, white, Asian, and Latino, who has the highest response rates, highest and lowest response rates. So mostly, so for black women respond to black men. No one, so over here, there's no arrows pointing to black women, so they're not even being asked the question. And then statistics like those and these, which are even more telling, so who the lowest response rates for women, the lowest response rates for men of all of those ethnicities is toward black women. Then we get to heartbreak. So in the news lately has been really rough for black folks, particularly young black folks. There have been, beginning with the highly publicized, it's not beginning there, but because it was highly publicized, George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin in Florida. I'm not going to Florida anytime soon. I'm not going to Arizona either because of their hard stance on immigration, but that's a digression from this presentation. Renisha McBride, there have been 4 really highly publicized cases in the last 2.5 years. Trayvon Martin was the first, but then, and there were 2 other young men, but Renisha McBride was shot with a shotgun in her face at 4 o'clock in the morning by a white homeowner who claims he thought she was trying to break in when she had just been in an accident and was really seeking help and was killed. So she was 19 years old. This was last fall in November. And then, of course, we have our current, I think it's very telling about how the world feels about black women and black girls. And at least 234 girls in northern Nigeria who were kidnapped by an extremist group there. And this didn't even make Western media until, this happened the reports vary between April the 14th and April the 16th of this year, and it didn't even make Western media until like May 2nd. So 2 weeks, most of these girls are still missing. They were kidnapped from their school early in the morning as they were trying to take final exams, or they were about to take final exams. So this is really telling about, for me, how the world views, how the media views, how black women are devalued in general, and it comes from so many different fronts. There are so many different angles. This is an educational angle. You can look at statistics on black women, and they're just disheartening. For me, it's a lived experience, and so what this presentation came out of was my literal psychological break with my research because it's so heavy. Like, this is so much to carry as a Black woman doing this research. And again, the context is how do girls feel about themselves? How do Black girls feel about themselves in light of this sort of information that is being widely spread through many media outlets? And the media is just sort of the mirror back, I would say, of what is intentionally being sent out for psychologically sent out for what Black women or how Black women should be viewed according to the media. So the triple double or triple consciousness, W.B. Du Bois, he calls it double consciousness, and what he's talking about with his double consciousness is, so in the early 1900s, this came in the Souls of Black Folk, which is, I think it was published in 1903. So what he called double consciousness, he talks about the Negro needing to know Negro history and needing to know white people's history because that's the context in which they live. For Black women, it's never about them. Gender studies, okay, I'm making sweeping generalizations which aren't true anymore. They're not as true as they used to be, they are still true. Gender studies tends to be about white women. Racial studies tend to be about Black men. So nowhere in there are Black women actually represented in their fullness, in their completeness, in their multiplicative selves. Not nowhere, we'll get to that. But very, very seldom. It is becoming more, I wouldn't call it common yet. I don't think we've hit a point of common, but it's becoming more pronounced, I would say. The triple consciousness or the triple, it's also called it's called biculturalism with a triple, I would call it triculturalism, being many Black women are less wealthy. So socioeconomic status then hits a third sense of devaluation, a third being on the fringes, or marginalization as well. So my concept in the literature have not been agreeing, but the parsing out, only looking at one of these aspects of identity when all of them are clearly intersected, which we'll get to again in a moment. So, but having to parse her identity out in so many different directions at so many different times for so many different things gets trying, I would say. Also, with some of the myths and stereotypes that go on about women, sexuality is huge, is a large part of some of the myths that are told about Black women, how they are hypersexualized, and then how this complicates all the other identities that they actually have that are already being marginalized. So that is, there are other myths. This is the one that I thought was most pertinent to this particular discussion. Patricia Hill Collins, she's sort of credited for naming them in an academic kind of way, and there are others, as I said. So, Black women armor. One of these myths is also the angry Black woman, and in the Black community, it's sort of the super Black woman who has to do everything. She has to hold everything by herself. For me personally, one of the best decisions I have made in my adult life is going to see a therapist, which is so taboo in Black communities. I didn't even tell my family, I didn't even tell my sister because my sister had so much judgment about it. I didn't even tell her until I was like a year in. And it was so hard for me because I had all these myths, all these stories in my own head about not being strong enough, and having to have help, which is still very taboo in the Black American community in particular. That's the community I know. It's prevalent in other communities as well, but I don't have the information to speak about that. So there's this armoring process just to get through in day-to-day life. The Stegosaurus is, again, like the arms and the heart and being in there instead of, my other option was a scorpion, but I thought that fueled angry Black woman. So I didn't necessarily want to fuel that as well. So sometimes the breaking is symbolic, sometimes it's a breakdown, sometimes it's a breakthrough, sometimes it's a little bit of both. And there is hope. one of the things they found, cultural congruity in HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, where black women have a space to be more fully themselves in the multiplicative states that they, or identities that they may possess or carry. And intersectionality. Christine Brooks created the diagram for Kimberly Crenshaw's term, intersectionality, where all of the different pieces of any one person are intertwined in this way. Though there are many facets. So there's still the double and triple consciousness where, who am I talking to? What face am I bringing to this particular conversation as well? So there's, inroads have been made, but it's pretty intense to be doing this as a research and trying to bring this voice. I talked to my sister. My sister said yesterday, she's like, okay, but you know this, and you just, like, you need to figure out how you're going to keep navigating it, which can be challenging. So cultural congruity, HBCUs is just one example. There are other examples. When my experience, I can't speak for anyone else, but in my experience being in community, in particular with other black women, where I don't have to explain every single facet about my identity because there is some underlying understanding there, has been very healing for me in a lot of ways. So thank you. That ends my part of it. It doesn't. There are other there are other inroads being made hardcore and or old school and like books. So Black Girlhood Celebration, which this is a good kind of celebrating women, young women through positive outlets. Also, this is called Homegirls Make Some Noise. Both of these are based in what's called hip-hop feminism, which I'm not sure how I feel about specifically, but it's definitely a key part of what the discussion looks like now. So, now that any questions or yes, ma'am?
Can you take that one step further in your, what is your critique of hip-hop feminism, or where are you critiquing right now?
So the term hip-hop is where, it's used to sort of be popular and approachable, which I get, and sort of really looking at hip-hop, and it uses a lens on how young women and girls are sort of defining themselves through the hip-hop culture. So I think it's really useful. I don't know, I don't know, I just don't know how I feel about it being the main lens that's sort of emerging as well, or one of the main lenses. I appreciate it being one of the main lenses, but it's hard to find, it's challenging to find like actual discourse on it. There's a lens, and the lens is defined, but something is missing for me, I would say. I don't quite know what that is right now.
Do you know the work of Adriana Clay? I think you might really like it. She's just published, I think it was New York University Press. I'll send it to you, Charlie, yeah. Because she's a sociologist at SF State, African-American woman who just takes on hip-hop culture.
Okay.
I just put it in her notes.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Chris. Yes.
So you said you're asking young black females how they feel about themselves. How are you doing that? What's your?
I'm doing a mixed methods research study. So there are assessments, the positive, negative affect. There's others. There's 4 assessments altogether. So doing that, and then I'm trying to get an average, if there's such a thing. Trying to figure out what this average might look like, what this average experience of black girls will look like. Probably 14 to 16-year-olds who have enough information behind them and are not quite thinking about, probably 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, not 12th graders specifically, because their focus is on what's next after high school. And taking, right now, the top and the bottom of the middle third of data, and then doing more extensive interviews with girls from that demographic group, again, to see if there's such a thing as a normal range of experience for black girls in this country.
where are you recruiting these girls from?
Well, I am moving to Houston in a month, so that changes. So probably Houston. There's a couple. So the first option is where I'm located, which will now be Houston. Second option is to do a couple of comparison groups. I have connections in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., so to do a couple of comparison groups. And should neither of those produce me enough information, which I don't think that's going to be the case, to take it, to make it less generalizable and to go more nationwide, because most of this can be done via the internet.
Yeah.
So, A, B, and C.
Yeah, okay. Good to have those going.
Yes, yes. Good dissertation is a done dissertation.
Bravo.
And Ms. Brown is trying to get to Dr. Brown. She's trying to get to that done point. So,
Right.
thank you.